assessment on what they expect to see in terms of student performance. So some of these assessments are going to be a little different, and the way they're scored is going to be a little different. But until students actually start taking them and they're scored this way on a more regular basis, I don't know necessarily that a teacher is truly going to know, well, gosh, is this really reflecting? You know, for example, you know, I look at the math one, and I look at the level 2 questions, and you know, by God, I would expect somebody to know, I would expect them to know order of operation, which is really what questions 1, 2, 3 are, you know, are testing. But each one is worth 5 points. So a student can get 2 of those wrong, and you're down to a 90. And that may or may not be what the teacher expected to have that effect on a percent. So what I'm going to ask is, how are we going to monitor the use of these to ensure that the scores that students are achieving kind of matches what a teacher's expectation would be of what it should show? Just because we're going to implement these, how are we going to monitor them and determine the effectiveness of using these common assessments and what they're telling us? So are our teachers going to collect any data? If so, what? How's it going to be looked at? How are we going to be informed of any changes that might need to be made midstream? Because, hey, we really thought that the way we had these types of questions pointed, leveled, and such were good, but now we're seeing we need to make some changes. So how is this whole process going to be monitored as we move forward?
The council's talked a lot about this, and whenever you implement as many assessments going forward next year as we're going to be implementing, there are always issues that come up, and you know as a teacher, the first time through you thought there are issues, you've identified some, but there could be others. So what the council is requesting, and that's why as part of the board goals, is that we monitor this next year as far as the grade level teams, the content committees like the math committee, language arts. So those issues would be brought back to those committees and then as needed to the curriculum council. And that what we do not want to do next year, because this is a big deal and it could take a lot of time, is to start any new curriculum writing. So that's the process that we're talking about. And there will be issues. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can guarantee you that not every assessment is going to be exactly perfect when the kids take it, and then we'll have to make adjustments.
Well, and when we first started with Dr. Wick and we got some of the analytical data, you know, got to the point where we could pinpoint down to almost a specific class. If, you know, 80% of the students got, you know, capitalization wrong or something like that. And that information was then given back to the teacher, the team level team or something. So it kind of showed deficiencies in curriculum, you know, where they could then, the teachers can then use that data and refine or tweak or whatever, and, you know, something that they thought that the students had down, they now know they need to go back and review.
Correct.
Or try a different tactic or something. So I would imagine this would be similar, but maybe what Leanna's wondering, I guess I am too, is how is this information going to make its way, you know, back to the teacher, and then what type of corrections will they in turn make?
And then ultimately back to us. Since,
Right.
you know, since we are going to be approving these assessments, you know, we're not truly approving each test. We're being asked to approve this concept of common assessments with a way of leveling and the way of scoring. But how then will the board be informed?
Oh, I got you.
As time goes on? Because,
Yes.
I threw my own
I understand your
subjectivity
question
in
a lot
there
better
that
now.
as a teacher, I mean, I know I look at all my assessments once I give them, and sometimes I say, God, it was really a stupid question, or, you know, other times, yeah, I mean, you do. You say, there's other ways I should have rephrased it, and should I really penalize the kid this number of points because I thought they should have known it, and, you know, maybe I didn't hit it hard enough. And I just think there's that much that always goes on with assessments in some way, shape, or form. But because we're coming up with such a, you know, not necessarily a drastic design, but a way in the way that we assess and the way that we grade, and a percent that's going to be earned, I think a teacher's going to evaluate that. You know, like I would look at that and say, okay, a student got 2 order of operation questions wrong. Well, look at everything else they got right. do I really feel that that's worth a 90%?
Right, I
You know,
mean,
and I just want to make sure that, I think teachers do realize they probably have the flexibility to modify, to change, to improve upon. But all I'm asking is then how will the board be kept apprised
Yeah,
of things
yeah,
that
what I'm
come
in-
up and changes that get
Yeah,
made?
what I'm envisioning, first of all those issues of individual teachers come back to the continuity committee. So math committee, language arts committee, that's what they monitor. Then they report back to the curriculum council, and then as always, the curriculum council updates the board. So what I would envision with this in regular intervals is that the board gets updates on what are any issues that are emerging with the implementation of assessments. The same thing would be true of report cards, that kind of thing. So your updates next year are going to be focused largely on assessment and report card implementation.
So would
right,
it
so
be-
could, go
Can I
ahead.
just finish? Would it be safe to then ask that at the very least, somewhere around, that first grading period, wherever it is, that an update to the board takes place then? Because I would think by the end of that first grading period, that a lot of these common assessments have at least initially been given.
Yeah, and
So-
I might even suggest maybe just before the grading period.
Well, whenever you have it, but I would
Okay.
think at the very least. And Mark, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
I was just
Please
gonna
go
ask
ahead.
for 5 minutes on every board agenda throughout the entire school year next year. And if there's nothing to be said, we skip it, and if you know something big's coming down the line, you give it 30 minutes. But let's have it 5 minutes every single month.
In the end, in theory, in that case, if you saw that a bunch of children were having a problem with that operational, like those couple questions, would you recommend, or would you just say, okay, we're gonna go over this again and redo the test, or,
I think I would be like almost every other teacher, and that is, I would really have to look at it, and I'd have to say, should they know it? Should they know it? And do I do it in a warm-up? Do I reteach? And I
Right.
wouldn't doubt that every one of our teachers would probably do the same thing, because it's
That's
kind
what
of
I'm
just
kinda
what you
thinking,
do.
right.
You look
That's what I'm-
you look at a lot of it, especially those quizzes that they're going to be taking. So,
And now, for
yeah.
parent questions, because this is, not that it's complicated, but, it's not real, it's not what they're used to seeing, 50 questions, 2 points for every question. They're not used to, how are we going to convey this to the families, to our parents?
You mean the point breakdown,
Correct.
or are we? Or should it
Well,
just?
yeah, are we? So basically, most people are used to, okay, you had 20 questions, 5 points each question, 100%. That's where we came up with our percentages. Now they're levels, they're different weighted. You're looking at me like I have 3 heads.
They're not weighted.
Or they're not weighted, but
Yeah.
they're graded differently.
They're not
based
graded
on-
differently.
They're
Well,
given different
Point value.
points.
They always were, questions were always given different points.
See,
There's no change in that process. It's only more systematic and better organized. It's still a 100-point scale.
Correct, but
Right.
certain questions are worth 5 points, certain questions are worth 1 point. Don't you think that well, then again, I guess it's a moot point because the parents aren't going to see the test, right? Because if I saw this test and I saw, wow, that's a pretty tough question, why'd you only get 1 point for that? If this wasn't conveyed to me and I was just looking at my child's report and I saw this end question and +1, because I'm assuming, I sometimes try to add up, how did you get to 93% or 93 points? How did you get it? That's not my question. Are we going to convey this information to the parents?
Or better still, the students, they're the ones taking it.
Well, the students need to know, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, we don't do that. We don't go through every test with parents now and tell them how we designate
Not every
points to them.
test, but it is a change from what they're used to seeing. I think, no, it's a change if they're not going to get the test home. We need to communicate this. You don't agree?
There's nothing different being done in terms of the way these are being graded. It's a 100-point scale. Questions are given different points.
The
You hold it up,
communication,
Mark.
The goals.
the goals.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that we can address that, because that was like, that entire conversation that we had a couple hours ago,
Right.
in my mind at least, was based on that.
Thank you. I think
Yeah.
it's really important, but then again, I got the deer in the headlights look, so I was like, am I
But
on
I
the wrong page here?
think that's where we address it.
Okay,
Seriously.
thank you.
I mean, I'm just not
That's
clear
where we
on-
can ensure that it gets done.
Okay.
I mean, are
Thank
you
you.
advancing a recommendation that John Reed would somehow communicate all of his common assessment grading practices to every parent on every test?
Absolutely not.
Cool.
Okay, that's what it sounded like.
No, No, never
I
mind.
guess
We'll
what
talk
I
about
got out of it from what Karen said is that I think a lot of times you see points and you're not really sure where those points came from, or